All right, you wanted more comparison reviews, so we're going to give you more comparison reviews. We've assembled the 5 4S monster trucks you can get on the market today. They're all technically what they call 1/10 scale, although they are much bigger than your typical 1/10 scale monster trucks like a Stampede or Granite or Rival MT-10. So if you're wondering why those are not in here, well, these are the supersized versions. These are the bigger versions. They're all 4S capable, a little bit larger than those monster trucks, and they are a little bit more expensive as well. So what we've got in front of us is the Traxxas Maxx Wide Max, also known as the Maxx V2. This has been out for a couple years now. We've got the Team Corally Sketer 4S, again 4S monster truck. I would consider it more like a stadium truck, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got the Arrma Kraton 4S V2.5. Been out on the market for about a year, updated with some chassis changes, some other things. I think they still call it the V2 and just consider it more like a running change, but everyone else calls it the V2.5. We've got its little brother, the Outcast 4S V2.5. So just slightly shorter wheelbase. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as the Crane, just rotates a little bit better in the air. And we've got the new kid on the block. We've got the Redcat Valkyrie. So this is pretty interesting because it's substantially cheaper than these other four, and we'll talk about that. So the way this is going to work is we're going to talk about every car individually. We do have full reviews on all these if you want to look up more in detail, but we'll talk about each one, kind of the highs and lows. We're going to give it a quick rating and ranking in 6 different categories. So we'll just talk about how it actually places in all those categories. And at the end, we'll sum up all the scores and see which one I think is the best 4S monster truck. So let's get into the review. Okay, first up, we got the Traxxas Maxx V2, or Wide Max as they call it. Highlights of this truck, it does have the clipless body system, so if you move this latch up here, you can pull off the body. Here's what it looks like underneath. It is basically a mini version of the X Max, or a bigger version of the Mini Max, and yeah, it's very, very solid. That's the number one thing I'd say about the Max. Probably the most durable car in RC, not just among the 4S monster trucks, but all the RC cars you can get out there. I think this is the most durable. You could throw it out a 2-story window. For the most part, it's probably going to survive. Tires are pretty decent as well. Other highlights of this, very good part support. So pretty much every hobby shop here in the US is going to carry Max parts. So if you break something, you know, I've broken a shock rod end or a C-hub or something like that, I was able to get this up and running within an hour. Just drove over to my hobby shop, picked up the part, it was ready to go. Parts are actually pretty cheap as well, so that's pretty nice. Lows of the Max, well, it just doesn't drive all that well in my opinion. It doesn't steer all that well. Jumping, landing is somewhat poor. I think the shock suspension setup on this is not the greatest out of the box, so it does tend to chassis slap quite a bit, makes a lot of noise. It's also a little bit harder to work on. Getting to the center diff especially is probably about 20-30 screws. It's a bit of a pain to work on in some points. It does have like the threaded hinge pins and things like that. And last thing, it is expensive. It costs about $570 at the time of this video, which is more than everything else. The cheapest in this class is a $300 Valkyrie. This is the most expensive, $570, and it's a little bit hard to say where that money is coming from. It does have a plastic geared, really weird size servo from like the X Max. The ESC is not particularly great, no adjustments. The radio is okay, the TKI is fine, the motor's fine, but you know, the components, the you know, what you're actually paying for, I think the value is not that great. So yeah, there's a quick look at that Max. Next up is the Team Corally Sketer 4S, and this one is quite different than the rest. It's based off an 8-scale buggy, essentially, kind of like the Python or Radix 6S. So it has a full 6S drivetrain, outdrives, diffs, everything, center diff as well. It all holds up to 6S, although it is a 4S vehicle. So they took a 6S buggy, threw on some stadium truck looking tires, stadium truck looking body, kept it 4-wheel drive, 4S power system, of course, and then they released it as a 10-scale like monster truck. Now I have modified mine. I have actually widened it, made a little bit more like a monster truck or a stunt truck like the rest of those, but you know, at its core I think it's still more of like a handling race style type vehicle like a Python. So I think it handles the best, steers the best, kind of cars through the corners the best, but I don't think it's as good of like a stunt truck. It doesn't rotate that well. These tires definitely don't balloon. It's not really meant so much for sending it up 30 feet high and doing like triple backflips. It's much more ground based in my opinion, to carve around, maybe even on a racetrack, I think this would probably be the best performing. But yeah, so the highs of this thing is it handles well. It is 6S capable if you want to get more power. Lows of this thing, I think you can break some things. I bent the Ackerman bar here. I've broken the front bumper. I think I've bent some of these shock standoffs, so those things can bend or break, so that's something to be aware of. I think also part support is a little more difficult, at least here in the US. The rest of those vehicles are all pretty easy to get parts. You know, you can normally pick them up in most hobby shops and get them up and running. So yeah, quick look at the Sketer 4S. Kraton 4S V2.5. I think Arrma or Horizon still calls it like the V2 and consider it like more of a running change, but everyone else calls it the V2.5. This is a great all-around truggy. It's more of a truggy than a monster truck, a little bit wider, a little bit longer than the rest of them. Obviously, it's got the truggy style body and the truggy style wing. Pros of this thing, it's got excellent electronics. I think I like the electronics the best in all these. It's got the Spectrum EC programmable, sort of hobby wing based, plenty of power, motors totally fine. Radio is best in class. It does have a receiver that is DSMR capable, so if you want to hook that up to another Spectrum radio, you can. Servo is a little slow, a little weak, not the best, but it was Metal Gear 25 tooth. Plastic tub chassis, although it does have aluminum shocks, does have 3 differentials, which is really nice, including a metal center differential. It does still have a plastic drive shaft down the middle. Tires are good, just handles really well, and the thing I like about this is it's the best all around. So the V2 I think was a little bit more truggy based. This is actually a little bit more stemmable than the old one. The center differential, moving the electronics a little bit more forward, allows it to rotate a little bit better in the air. So there's the highs of this thing, and it's not that expensive at $450. It is the second cheapest, obviously tied with the Outcast, which is the same price. Really only a little bit more expensive than the Valkyrie. Cons of this thing, not a whole lot of upgrades, I guess you would say. You know, the plastic drive shaft, maybe you can occasionally get rocks in there and tear it up. But there's not a whole lot of negative. Other than that, it's not truly like a race machine or anything like that. It's a good all-arounder. It steers well, maybe not quite as well as the Sketer, maybe not as stunnable as the Outcast, but if you want an all-around vehicle, I think this is one of the best choices. So yeah, quick look at the Kraton. The smaller brother to the Kraton is the Outcast 4S V2.5. Pretty much the same truck. I mean, obviously different body, different wing, and then the main thing, shorter wheelbase, so it does rotate in the air a lot faster. It does tricks a little bit better. These tires are excellent as well, so I'm a big fan of these tires. That's one of the nice things about this, but essentially pretty much the same as the Kraton. I think it does score as a tie with the Kraton in several different categories. Maybe slightly more durable because it is a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter. The Kraton's just got a longer wheelbase. Other than that, pretty much the same. Performance-wise, I would say this is probably not quite as all-around as the Kraton. I think the Kraton performs a little better in like all circumstances, whereas this one is really more of like a dedicated stunt truck. So really better for doing jumps and tricks in the air. So yeah, from that perspective, maybe a little bit worse. But other than that, pretty much the same as the Kraton 4S, essentially the same type of truck. Finally, we got the Redcat Racing Valkyrie, and this is interesting because it is way cheaper than the rest. It is $300 or even on sale for $240 for Black Friday, so absurdly cheap, and it's still capable. It's actually got pretty decent components. It's got a hobby wing ESC, a very strong motor. Servo is totally fine. Radio is actually decent. It's like a Fly Sky rebranded radio. It is plastic tub chassis, plastic shocks, plastic drive shaft, so you know that's kind of what you expect for this price range, but it is hugely capable. It's still very fast. Steering is a little bit not the greatest. You know, it's a little bit slow off or sensitive off center, and then kind of slows down as you get to the corner, so not quite as linear, but it is a tough RC car, and at $300 or $240, whatever you're paying for this, it is quite cheap. Also comes in a truggy version if you like to style that with the wing and stuff, but I've got the monster truck. Great little monster truck overall for sure. You know, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, I don't think you're losing much by getting this over the other brands. And the last con is a little bit harder to work on. Certainly getting these differentials is a bit of work, probably 20 screws or so. Also part support in the US is decent. You know, a fair amount of hobby shops are going to carry Redcat parts, but technically Redcat is not sold in Europe, so getting part support there may be a bit more difficult. But other than that, yeah, pretty solid truck overall. So there's a quick look at 5 monster trucks that you can buy on the market today. So what is the winner? The scores actually came out pretty interesting. I guess about what I expected. The one I definitely felt was like my favorite, and the one that actually scored the best is this guy, that Kraton 4S. So it scored relatively well in pretty much every category. The only area where it's below average, in my opinion, I guess it finished 4th in durability because the Outcast was slightly higher because it's lighter, but I don't think this is like a fragile vehicle at all. I think it's actually very durable. I think I've only broken like a shock rod in, maybe an arm on this, but other than that, it's a very durable truck. The scores, again, I would say not necessarily that reflective of how good or bad these things are. Certainly there are things that don't show up, like the Sketer is 6S capable, but that doesn't really show it in the scores. The value of the Valkyrie is ridiculous. It is way cheaper than the rest of these, but it doesn't really, show up that much in the scores. It's not like the value is weighed more heavily than the other things. So I would say the scores are the end all be all, but what scored the highest and probably what I would pick as the best all around 4S monster truck is the Kraton. The price is pretty good. Performance is pretty good. Really no weaknesses. Part support, electronics are excellent. All that stuff is all really good. Yeah, you could maybe break a shock rod end, or I think it's still possible to crack a chassis. I haven't on mine. The V2s were kind of known for that, but they pretty much fixed that with the V2.5. So yeah, overall great choice in my opinion. You can't go wrong with the Kraton or its little brother, the Outcast. They're all actually pretty good trucks depending on what you want. Like the Max is the most durable, and some people really want that. I've got a buddy that breaks his RC car every single time he goes out. I give him a Max, and then now he never breaks it, and he's able to run all the time. And that doesn't show up that well in the scores because it's only one category, but could certainly be a big factor in what you want to buy. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.